Welcome to the book club where the size is just right, the books aren't too long, and you never need to host. That's our job. We bring best-selling and award-winning writers of every genre to Twin Cities metro area libraries to share their stories, discuss their work, and answer those burning questions you've always wanted to ask your favorite authors. This is a book club where we don't have to argue about what the author meant. They can tell us. The book club that doesn't require a clean house or wine and cheese. And in this book club, if you haven't read the book, it's all right. Although, we hope you'll be inspired to pick it up next time you're in the library. I'm your host, Slade Kemet, and you can consider the book club rewritten because this is Club Book. Club Book is made possible by Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, MELSA, and Library Strategies, part of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. We would also like to thank our partnering bookseller, Red Balloon Bookshop. This podcast features Jon Hickey at Scott County Library, Prior Lake. Jon Hickey is a member of the Lac du Flambeau Band of Chippewa Indians and author behind the 2025 literary breakout, Big Chief. Set on the fictional Passage Rouge Reservation in northern Wisconsin, Big Chief follows Mitch Caddo, a young law school graduate and aspiring political fixer, as he attempts to clinch reelection for Tribal President Mack Beck. Political control of the nation, and with it the lucrative Golden Eagle Casino and Hotel, is contested by a group of intrepid activists that include campaign manager Layla, Mitch's estranged sister and Mack's former love interest. Hickey's themes and tone have earned favorable comparisons to modern classics like The Night Watchman by Louise Erdrich and There by Tommy Orange. Among a host of glowing early reviews, fellow novelist David Heska Wanbli Weiden opines, "We've been waiting for the great Native American political novel, and here it is." Rare for a debut release, Big Chief started high on the most anticipated books of 2025 lists for publications as varied as the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times to LitHub.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here and good to see all of you. That was a very wonderful introduction. Thank you so much. This is Big Chief, the debut. I noticed that some of you have it and finished it. I always like to start these events by just reading from the first part of the book. And then I like to talk a little bit about it, talk a little bit about the inspiration and where it comes from, the writing of the book. It took a long time. It took about 9 years. And then, but I'm really interested. One of the pleasures of doing these events is talking to people who have read the book and people who have, formed opinions about it, good and bad. But I love hearing, it reflected back, because I spent how many years, 9 of them, in the dark of my office, just writing this thing. And when it's out there and you're talking to people who have read this thing, and it's always just a strange moment for me, but a good moment. So I usually like to open up to questions kind of early on and just talk about it. So I'm going to start with a reading from the first part, not the exact first part, but page 5 if you wanted to follow along. On the morning of Thanksgiving, or rather feast day, because Mack decided Passage Rouge would not honor the colonialist origins of the holiday, the people of our mid-sized reservation line up along Peace Pipe Road, the main drag in town. They're in good spirits because we're handing out the annual per capita checks. 2 G's, double the usual amount thanks to our last-minute raid on the general fund. Credit cards and overdue rents are about to be paid off. Used cars and Christmas gifts are about to be bought. And on top of this, the first 50 tribal citizens in line get a free meal and a $20 casino voucher for a couple of spins inside. Are we buying votes or delivering on promises? Well, it depends on whose camp you're in. I watch our constituents from the window of the Migazi suite on the top floor of the 4-story hotel, and Max sees them too, a wary, contemptuous look clouding the usual ursine friendliness of his face. He's going down there to dole out meals, hand out per capita checks, and remind them that in a week they're going to vote and they better make the right choice, although it's possible, even probable, that these same people will vote for Gloria Hawkins, which has the president feeling morose this morning. He hasn't said a word to me since I've come up to the suite, so I startle when he croaks out, "Where the hell's Bobby Lone Eagle?" He's referring to our chief of police who's fetching the president's ride, the big chief from the car wash in town. He's on his way. I wasn't going to make you walk your ass over there. I just don't want to be waiting on him at the valet stand with my hands in my pockets. Wouldn't be a good look, right, cuz? We're not really cousins in the literal sense. We are not related. Cuz is a name to keep me close, to make me feel like we're bound together by something other than our jobs, our office, our ambitions. We are family in our deeds, our conspiracy. And maybe it's his way of reminding me that if we're going down, we're going together. I grunt in the affirmative and gently prod him over toward the door to get him moving. On our way out, he stops to check himself in the full-length mirror at the door, smooth down the whiskers, tug the front of his ribbon shirt to get it to drape just right. We get into the elevator, his breath whistling through the hairs in his nose. He's white-knuckling a hangover, but when the elevator doors open to the Golden Eagles gaming floor, he has willed himself sober, wearing a dreamy half-smile. There's a word for him, and that word is massive. He is a solid mass. Growing up, he was tall and skinny, but now he's tall and massive. Not fat, not muscular, just massive. Covering this mass like a tarp is a satin shirt trimmed with blue and red ribbon, embroidered with flowers and vines. A beadwork Thunderbird medallion as big as a teacup saucer dances a soft two-step along his massive chest as he walks through the casino. A flat-brimmed Washington Nationals hat sits on his head just a little off-center, and underneath, his hair is woven into a tight, long braid that lands in the middle of his massive back. It doesn't matter what they say about him in private, all the sniping, all the whispers. The gold-uniformed dealers and pit bosses stand at attention when they see him, and he nods at them as they tend to the 24-hour churn of cards and chips. He can relax here. He can be himself. He lives upstairs. His gravitational wake pulls me along with him into the casino. Bobby Lone Eagle, the chief of police, and let's not forget, because I haven't, one of my childhood tormentors, intercepts us at the mouth of the double row of blackjack tables in the grand atrium. Mac gives him a fist bump, and Bobby falls in with us, and we set out for the golden doors that lead to the valet stand. That's where our former tribal president and current shadow advisor Buzz Carlisle waits for us, making a big show of tapping the face of his Rolex to remind us that Indian time ain't gonna cut it today. Our people are waiting in the cold for their checks. We see him, but that doesn't make Mac walk any faster. We may have been good sports and kept him on as a consultant to preserve institutional knowledge, all that. No sense throwing out the pilot after hijacking the plane, right? But he sure as hell acts like he's still the boss. I guess after you've been tribal president for 2 decades, it's hard to let go of that power. Get your asses in gear, he's saying. He needs to teach us kids a few things, like the importance of punctuality. But we're fast learners, aren't we? For instance, we learned in the last go-around that if you want to be chief and your name isn't Arno or Coda, you put on your piously traditional Indian persona, get your ass in front of the electorate and speak with serious and measured tone about the need to go back to the old traditional ways, to rediscover the language of our ancestors, to build our nation to provide for the next 7 generations of ancestors to come. You shake some hands and you learn some names and you make it rain for the right people at the right time. Now, this work doesn't happen on the gaming floor. Sure, on this feast day morning, there's no drought of gamblers leashed to the 9-line machines with their loyalty cards tracking their compulsions, inhaling Newports and exhaling gossip between slot spins. These are not our voters. The people most likely to actually vote for us await us outside the doors of the William R. Paulson Tribal Government Center, cold and hungry for their checks and free meals, which will be handed to them by their tribal president. I may run the operation, but I'm meant to be invisible, to blend in. Mac, however, must dominate the room, and watching him never fails to fill my ears with that pleasing electric hum, the low-frequency rumble of power. Our grip on that power is shaky now, but we aren't dead quite yet. Furtive glances shoot through our bones like gamma radiation as we parade across the gaming floor. He smiles at people who recognize him, his head tucked down in rehearsed humility. He is a head taller than anyone else, which is probably not true, but feels true. Hands come out of nowhere and reach up and slap him on the shoulder. He turns his head slightly to acknowledge them. We walk down that double row of blackjack tables underneath the ornate dome, its rim decorated with the silhouettes of our Anishinaabe ancestors and Shemokmanog traders meeting together in brotherhood to sign the Treaty of La Pointe. And when one of those silhouettes moves, I realize I'm looking at a janitor with a vacuum cleaner strapped to his back. I know him. We paid for his mother's wheelchair rent because we look out for our people. With his free hand, the janitor waves at the president, but I'm the only one who catches it, and the sight of that silhouette cleaning up after the other silhouettes chills me like a blast of air conditioning, and I lag after the entourage until the president turns around and notices I'm a few paces behind him. I can see him talking at me, but I don't quite hear it over the electric dissonance of 250 video slot machines chiming at once, so he repeats himself. You okay, cuz? You got that look on your face. Don't worry about my face, I say, more testily than I mean to. Pardon me. He pauses for a moment, takes too long to think of something smart to say, but he's got nothing. He moves down the aisle. I'm going to stop right there. Pardon me, all of a sudden I got the scratch in the throat. Yeah, the little tickle, yeah. I'm always struck by whenever I read around here. I was in Wausau last week, and Wausau is very close to the Lac du Flambeau Reservation where my people are from, and I realized as I was talking to them that a lot of them knew about the stuff that was going on in Lac du Flambeau, you know, with the tribal council, and had the history, and I was looking out and I was like, oh, I'm just waiting for somebody to have a question, you know, some sort of they're looking at it, they're reading it. I had this very odd sensation of when I was writing the book, this anxiety, this nervousness, because I knew that I wanted to write about tribal politics. I think it's an endlessly fascinating subject. It's the legal frontier in this country. And things that happen there have huge importance outside of just these small communities. But I did have that anxiety as I was writing it because I didn't want to write too close to things that had actually happened, because I do know family and friends that I have a cousin right now running for council. So I'm very aware of that, you know, that I know all these people with skin in the game. And my mother always told me, you know, yeah, your uncles and, you know, all the people in Flambeau are reading the book, you know, and they're like, who's that? And I have to say, I mean, it's all fiction. It's all made up. But actually, that's kind of cousin. That's kind of cousin Stash over there. That was one of the tensions throughout as I was writing this book. Is, you know, I know a lot of people that have run for council or have, you know, I know a lot of people that I knew from school who went back to their reservations to, you know, to give back to their communities, and a lot of people that went back with these ideals that tend to get dashed, you know, as soon as you enter the reality of, you know, running for office in a small town. So yeah, and then the other anxiety I had was I'd go to these events. This is how I had it in my mind. You know, this is the scenario that I wrote in my mind, is that I'd be doing an event like this, and there would be that one guy that had been on council, and that would, you know, have some very pointed questions. And the thing is that I noticed is that, you know, I did a lot of events in April and May when the book came out. The book came out April 8th. And it started happening. I was, you know, in Portland and in Seattle, these far-flung places. I would see somebody come up in the line, and I could see that they meant business. And then they hand me like the business card of when, you know, and, oh, you work on council. Oh, okay, all right. So yeah, here it comes. And more often than not, most of the time, they would say, yeah, you know, it actually does kind of run this way. And I'm like, don't tell me that, please, because, you know, on some level, this is a fictional story, you know, that in some ways it's simplified. In some ways, we gloss over some of the real dry parts. Don't tell me that this is actually how it happens, because we're in bigger trouble than I thought. But in general, the response to it has been very positive. And something that I've heard a lot is there are a lot of people that were looking for this kind of story. The story about disconnection and finding your way back to a community. And that's been really gratifying, because that was the reason why I wrote the book in the first place. I've been writing for about 20 years or so, 25, 26. I started grad school about 21 years ago, 2004. And, when I look back, my work, it's mostly short stories that have been published. Those short stories tend to circle around this same theme of feeling disconnected or estranged from a community. And I live in San Francisco right now. I used to live close to here. I lived in Wisconsin as well. So I consider myself a Minnesotan/Wisconsinian. I thought I knew how that word went. But like I said, I've been out in San Francisco for 16 years. And, a lot of the stuff that happens on the reservation happens at that distance. I'm not able to go and vote in every election. You have to be there. There's no absentee voting at Lac du Flambeau. And I would say about 15 years ago, there was a lot of strife going on with the government of Lac du Flambeau, specifically. And one of the things that's been a constant in my life is the casino. Gambling. And Lac du Flambeau, has anybody been up that way? Maybe? Hey, you've been up there? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so they have a casino there called Lake of the Torches. And as I remember when it was just a couple of slot machines inside of an old storefront. And over the last 40 years or so, has become this giant concern, this big resort. Not as big as the one that's over here, which is not as nice. Trying to make enemies with the Metawankatons. The Lake of the Torches Casino is a resort, right? It's a casino and a hotel, and it has grown in size, over the last few decades. But the problem was in I'm not going to get the year right offhand, but about 15 years ago, the tribe was run by people who had decided kind of unilaterally to take on a giant amount of debt in order to finance. They wanted to buy a boat. The boat was this leaky, rusty riverboat in Natchez, Mississippi, and the plan was to turn that into a casino. Nothing got built. Nothing got built. It was just endlessly delayed. The tribe was in a massive amount of debt for this and another venture into, I believe it was precision optics. They were trying to get this business on the reservation, except the council, this was what stuck with me. The reason they couldn't get that done was because the council couldn't get security clearances because a lot of them had criminal records, right? That it was this difficulty in doing this was really directly related to this sort of corruption and machine politics that had been and that is in many ways still a factor in the politics of the tribe. So I was watching this stuff happening kind of from afar, and from California, and not really being able to vote on it or to be a part of it. But what I saw was, from afar again, was that people were demanding that the tribal council would, have an audit, and we'd have an accounting of all this money. There was a huge court case where we were being sued by Wells Fargo, and this case ended up in front of the Supreme Court because of sovereignty issues. And in the middle of all of that, a certain faction on the reservation occupied the tribal government center, took it over, and did a lot of damage. It attracted law enforcement from far and wide, and it was a huge standoff. And I happen to know some of those people. Some of those people were probably distant relations, in some way, cousins of some kind. But like I said, I remember, again, watching this and feeling disconnected from it, by geography and maybe by other things as well, When my son was born, my first son, I have two wonderful boys, they're great. But when the first one was born, he has the blood quantum. We'll talk a lot about blood quantum in just a minute. But he has the blood quantum to be enrolled in the tribe. And we did that. And we went through the paperwork and all that sort of thing. But it gave me pause in thinking, that what does that mean? What does it mean that he's on paper? On paper, he's a citizen of this place. And he's never been there. I've never lived there myself. My grandparents were part of the relocation generation. And in the 50s, after World War II, they were relocated to Chicago. So they joined the American Indian community there. And did not return to Flambeau until they were retired, right, back in the 90s, 80s. So I've always felt this sort of disconnection, and yet, you feel completely tethered to this place, spiritually, or, definitely spiritually, right? That my sense of spirituality, my sense of morality, my good versus, right versus wrong, really comes from this place and my grandparents and my ancestors. And it's a place that, we visited often, every couple of weeks we'd be up there. My parents just moved back. So this place, will never, leave my heart. This is part of me. Maybe not as true for my son. And I don't know exactly how to reconcile that, except bring them, and we have, but it's definitely a different thing. So it made me think about a character who feels a similar sense of that disconnection, but you can't just let go. You can't just say, oh, I'm not part of that anymore. Like the most important parts of me really come from this place. So I had this character. A character who is not me. I'm not a lawyer, and I certainly wouldn't try to take over the government of a place. At this moment, I don't know. Hadn't thought about it too much, but maybe somebody that's a little bit more down the line in terms of a spiritual crisis, right? The book is about politics, ostensibly about politics. That's the backdrop. That's the background. But what I realized as I was writing it was that I was looking at somebody that was going through a very spiritual crisis, and working very hard to fill this void that had been lost, because he turned his back on the spirituality, he's turned his back on the old ways. And he had filled it with the quest for power, ego and ambition. And that's where we find Mitch in the very beginning, the part that I read. He's in the middle of this. He knows there's something wrong. There's a physical aspect of this. And he tries to fix this through power, right? Being, the most powerful person on the reservation. So that's where I was coming from with that. It took a long time to find that vehicle, which is what I was alluding to before. I started grad school back in 2004, and here I am now with my debut novel 2 decades later. but I think I was always looking for a model. I was always looking for the inspiration. I take inspiration from books that I've loved myself, and trying to pay it forward and pay homage to certain things. And I'm always very, very pleased, hopefully it's somebody in this room, when somebody picks up on the allusions to All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren. Some of us are familiar with this book. It's a classic, right? An American classic, and it's ostensibly about politics, but of course it's about so much more than just that. It's about the soul. It's about somebody that's trapped in this sort of nihilism, who again tries to fix that through power and finding that to be insufficient, right? So this book really started. It started in fits and starts over the years, but eventually around the year 2016, I don't know what was going on around that time, some sort of important election, I think, that it all kind of came together. And I remember I'm going to write about an election on a reservation. These things are very small scale, but everybody knows each other. Everybody kind of hates each other a little bit. So it's very rich in terms of dramatic potential. And then I had my model, which is, All the King's Men. Naturally, that I would find, inspiration from a white man from Louisiana, writing about politics of the 1930s, 1940s. But I really did find an affinity there. The writing about the land, which is, like the land becomes a character in All the King's Men. The voice of that was, kinetic. It moved, and I knew I wanted something like that. So the book began as an homage, like a point-to-point homage, and it was quite long. It was about 450 some pages or something like that, not counting all the stuff I'd cut. I gave it to my agent, or the person who was going to become my agent, and she said, it needs to be shorter. Debuts are not allowed to write 450-page novels, unless you're really, really special, which I'd like to think I am, but I'm not. And I said, okay, all right, well, how much does it need to be cut? She said, it needs to be cut by 25%. I was like, okay, all right. And I'll show you. And I proceeded to cut 50%. I had less than 200 pages at the end of the cutting session. That was a hard morning, And I took it all and I put it in a very sad little file on my computer called cuts. Like I'm going to be like, okay, one day I will find, new life for these scenes that I so lovingly wrote. Hasn't happened yet. Some of it did eventually make it back into this thing. But what I realized was that, again, it's a very different thing hearing these criticisms from your agent, who definitely has skin in the game, wants to see you succeed and everything like that. So I did take it in stride, but at the same time, I realized that fundamentally the book needed to change quite a bit. And after cutting half of throwing it in the sad little file, I realized that I could not structure it like All the King's Men. I had to go back to these chapters where there was a reelection campaign happening. That's how the book used to go. There was a reelection campaign happening. There'd be these short chapters that were taking place in present day, and then it would go back to the rise and fall of Mack, our tribal president, and I could see what she was talking about, that it sagged in the middle. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, and that's kind of the story of my writing life, is doing something and realizing I don't know at all what I'm doing, and then going back and fixing it. But I did realize that those short chapters that I was just talking about, those were actually the book. Those were the novel. That was the novel. And that's what happened. I expanded those chapters. I went back and found the through line for that. And somehow it became this thing. So And that's why it took 9 years. Yeah, the end. It took as long as it takes, and I know that when I speak to events like this, I know I'm speaking to at least a few writers, in the audience, but it just, that's the lesson that I got from it, was that, these things take as long as they take. I was trying to make this thing happen earlier, and maybe for the wrong reasons. I needed to get a job. I needed a book so I could apply to be a person that teaches these things. But when I allowed it to just be what it wanted to be, it all came together. And yeah, it's been a strange year. It's been a lot of activity. I had the tour back in April and May. Right now I was in Ithaca, New York about how many days ago? I don't know what day or time it is. My wife and children are mad at me because I am on the road a lot this October. About to go to Canada. And like I said at the beginning, that this has been one of the pleasures, is coming and talking to people who have read the book.
With that, we have reached the part of our podcast where we turn to our club book audience for questions and comments for Jon Hickey and his work. In this book club, we like to encourage members and authors to connect and engage and help bridge the gap between the page you read and the process it took to write it. Our first question of the night comes from an audience member inquiring about the title of Hickey's book.
Big Chief as the title, that was always the title. And I feel like I'm in kind of the minority of writers here, which I did not have a fight over the title or the cover. I usually like this cover. I mean, I get a lot of, I didn't make it, somebody else did. I'll take the compliments for it though. But Big Chief, yes, Big Chief is the truck. It's the outward symbol of power, but it's also alluding to something I always bring up is that I'm coded as a indigenous author, right? And you get pigeonholed into these things, and you're expected to kind of write Indian stuff, and which isn't a problem because that's my life, right? It's part of my background. But I always felt, and I always chafed at it a little bit, just that there are expectations of this. I was in France, just whatever month ago it was, maybe 2 months ago, talking to the French publisher. And what he was saying, it's always very bracing, because when there's the language barrier, I think he's a little bit more straightforward, this French publisher of mine. So he just sort of put it, out there. He's like, it's a difficult book. I'll try not to do the accent, but it's hard not to. I was in France. I was sitting in this cafe, like a little cafe, drinking a little tiny cup of coffee. I was living the dream of, my book being published internationally. And what he was saying was that it's a difficult book to sell because in the imagination of the French reading public, the Indians are on horseback or they're alcoholique. That's how he said it. I was like, it sounds classy when you say it like that, alcoholique. So I always felt like you do get pigeonholed, you do get kind of put into these boxes, and I always joked to people that I'm going to put out a book, and there's going to be a feather on it. There's going to be a feather on it. And if you notice, there is a feather on it. But it is on my terms, I think. And I think that one of the things that I wanted in the cover was that there is a sort of irony, and that, we have this iconography, and that we're using it in, like I said, ironically, we're challenging these sorts of things. So there's my feather. It's very tasteful. I actually kind of like it. But Big Chief also, as, the title, taking this thing that, man, it just, to me it brings up, whenever there were Indians on Bugs Bunny cartoons, like that real outdated sort of sense of, the big chief,
They say in movies, in the old movies.
Yeah. And what we have is like, in this book is about appearances, and it's about self-mythology, to a certain extent. And Big Chief, tends to have that connotation to it, I think. So I'm bringing up the old ideas. I have characters who kind of internalize it in a way to reclaim it. But yeah, for whatever reason, it was never a contention. Like I have friends that fought so hard, for covers and for titles, and I was fortunate not to have to do that.
This audience member asks how Jon Hickey decides what ideas will be short stories and what will be novels.
I used to write a lot more short stories when I was, in the workshops, and those of us who might be familiar with the writing classes, short stories are generally more, you can talk about them, in an hour, right? You can go through the whole thing in an hour, and in a novel, it's just this whole thing, this whole task. You have to bring in this giant manuscript, and people get mad at you in class. You're like, I'm gonna have to read this. It's not even done. And it's. I found that it's. I think maybe when I started moving away from the workshops a little bit, I did my MFA at Cornell University 20 years ago, and then I was Stegner Fellow at Stanford, which is a 2-year program, and that also is workshop based, right? 3 hours a week you're in the room with these people, crazy people. Writers. And I don't know, there was like a point where I kind of fell out of love with stories, short stories. And I think I did this, I was reading the Best American Short Stories one year. Some of us are familiar with this series, it's great. But I made the mistake of reading them all like within a couple of days, right? So I sat down and I read it, and it was like, this is the book I'm reading. And by the end of it, I was depressed. I was just sad because like every story that year, I don't know about, lately, every story was about something more and more horrible. Like there's a dead kid, or, like a atrocity, or, just some sort of like, deep sadness. And the stories are fine by themselves, but when you collect them all in like one little thing there, it tends to accumulate, I think, and you got to come up for air a little bit. I wrote what I consider to be the proto Big Chief. It was maybe about 10 pages back in 2008. I don't call it a part of the novel because it was very, very, very different. It was just my first stab at trying to write about tribal politics. And I wanted something that I needed a vehicle for it that was bigger than the short form. It needed to be expansive enough so that I could get into the nitty-gritty of these things that I find so interesting. So I think it was probably 2016, like I said.
This question is about the character of Layla and her intertwinement with the other characters in the book.
I mean, all the characters have gone through, a journey, basically, and one of the hardest things, especially in the early going, was finding the people, right? Because I had a subject, but, well, who was it about, right? And that's the thing that powers the novel. And in the very early iterations of it, there was a cast of like background characters, and each draft, some of those characters kind of got closer and closer and closer. And one of them was Mack. I'll get to Layla in just a moment, but Mack was like, in the very early on, a very secondary character, like really far away. But every time he came in, he said something, that was like, and I'd be writing and I'd be like, that's funny. And he was kind of a goofball, and he's still a little bit of a goofball. He's a young guy. But every time I went back to those, he would get a little bit more screen time or page time. He would just linger for a little bit longer. And at a certain point, I just realized that he's the president. He's just, this is where he's at. Layla was always there, and Layla's the younger sister, the pesky younger sister. That's just kind of like, again, in the background a little bit. But then, just like with Mack, every draft, she was just asserting herself a little bit more. And I was like, okay, now this is a central person to the book. It just happened that, she's got her involvements everywhere. And it just sort of became natural after about 30 drafts. Because after you've been rewriting this thing over and over and over again, you kind of forget exactly when these things happen. But Layla, those were the most fun parts to write. Layla and Mack. You might see this as you're reading it.
Our next question is if Hickey outlines his novel before sitting down to write it.
It unfolded as I went. There's always the dichotomy of writers who, and I hate the terminology, and I'm going to have to say it anyway. It's planners or pantsers. I hate that word so much. But it describes, how we go about things. And I know a lot of people that do outline. They have to know that. They have to know where they're going. I feel like it's more natural. For myself, like the stuff that occurs to me. I'm trying to experience the book as a reader would. So my first drafts tend to go really, really fast, but without the plan. Although sometimes it feels like I should have probably outlined. You don't have to agree with me. You don't tell me anything. There are definitely some times I was like, man, it would have been good to outline. So like in the late drafts, like when in the production cycle, there's a process called proof pages, and some of us are familiar. That's when they typeset the book so that it looks like it's going to look. And they say, don't change anything. And I'm like, I'm going to change a lot of stuff. There's got to, when we got to that stage, I did write an outline just to make sure that I had everything, because that's the stage where everybody's just making sure that everything makes sense. They have editors that, are looking for discrepancies or mismatches, continuity errors, that sort of thing. And in that case, yes, I actually absolutely did have to have some document that was like, okay, this is what's happening here, and this is what's happening here. But in the composition thing, I'm just throwing words up. Maybe if I was an outliner, it would take a lot less time.
This club book audience member wonders about the development of Hickey's characters, especially Mack.
I like all the characters. I've been in these events, and I've been working with a moderator, and the moderator's like, Mitch is a very unlikable character. I'm like, what are you talking about? I like him fine, But the thing is that these are characters in crisis, right? And we're not our best selves, and we're not our prettiest selves in crisis, I think. And I wanted to write something that was somewhat realistic. And when you're writing about politics, one of the challenges is being didactic, and having an agenda. And I like, having a definite favorite in here. And I'd like to think that at the end of this, in my mind anyway, that everybody's got a justification. Everybody is convinced that they are trying to do what's best for Passage Rouge, the community. Whether that's true or not is up, is up for debate. But like in their hearts, I think. And what you're talking about, it was a very gratifying part to write. Because I realized that, first of all, I actually absolutely had to. Otherwise he's just this sort of cartoon villain. And but there was always that pain in the background, and I never really explored it until I got to that point where I was writing it.
This fan likens Big Chief to the popular HBO series The Wire, in particular, the themes of corruption and morality.
I mean, I think that's also a feature in The Wire as well. You know, if you remember at the end, the people that you've spent all this time just hating on, end up chief of police, right? The unfortunate thing is, the consequences of actions, are not always addressed, and we're seeing that now, on a grand scale, I think. But to your earlier point, when The Wire was on, I was definitely watching that. I was definitely, but I think too, with The Wire, and I don't know if you're familiar with the other David Simon properties like Treme, Call Me a Hero or something like that. There were a couple other shows that he put out. And they were very didactic. There was always a character there that was saying the David Simon stuff. And I say this, again, I love The Wire. I love it. And definitely, cornerstone of the pantheon of TV that I love. But I also could see maybe the strings a little bit, that I didn't want to write something that had like this definite through line of and I didn't want to write something that was like completely cynical, because I do find it a little bit cynical. It's definitely pessimistic, and I don't think cynicism is in short supply these days. There's a lot of cynicism out there, and that's another thing I was very aware of. Is I don't necessarily want to put that out there. Because I don't think that I'm an overall cynical person. I don't think I'm a truly pessimistic person. And at the end of this book, I feel like there's if you don't get the uplift, or if you don't get the consequences, all those sorts of things, there's at least the possibility for it. The ending is a little open-ended.
Another audience member wonders about what Hickey likes to read.
So we've already talked about All the King's Men. I won't keep going on about it, but I highly recommend it. If this is the gateway drug to All the King's Men, I'd be super happy. But I grew up reading a lot of Stephen King, and the first time, they were probably the first adult books that I'd read. And it goes back to stories, because I read these short stories, and they had, he always had like those annotated list in the back, and he would talk a little bit about, how this story came to be, and how he wrote it, how he researched it. And I remember spending a lot of time reading that, and kind of, just sort of living inside of that. And it was maybe my first exposure to writing as craft. This is, there's an approach, there's practices. And I got to college and to grad school, and you have to expand a little bit, otherwise you're writing these Stephen King stories, basically. Scary. But I really got into Invisible Man, Ralph Ellison. And in some ways that comes off in the book, I want to say. I hope so. I don't know. But Invisible Man was kind of the skeleton key to all the other American literature, if we're familiar with this. In the very beginning of Invisible Man, the prologue, he's just making allusions to Dostoevsky, to Thomas Hardy, to Herman Melville, and like I said, I was young, and I did stupid things like typed out the entire Invisible Man just to feel what it felt like to write it. It's kind of like covering, cover band. But I was able to really get in there and just this thing is so full of references. It's just this sort of Bible of American literature. So that was a huge influence. And when I went to grad school, I was lucky enough to run into Dennis Johnson a few times. Familiar, Dennis Johnson? He taught at Cornell for a semester, and then I keep on running into him. I saw him at Stanford, and but his book Train Dreams is it's a short book, and they made it into a movie. I did not realize this. I just found this out last night, randomly. They made this into a movie. It's called Train Dreams, and to be able to pull off what he does in about 90 pages is just an amazing feat. I don't know how he does it. I'll probably spend the rest of my writing life trying to figure it out. But yeah, Dennis Johnson is definitely up there. If you're an Anishinaabe writer, you live under the shadow of Louise Erdrich, of course, who I've been lucky enough to meet. And Love Medicine was definitely one of those early books.
Our last question of the night comes from an audience member wondering about Jon Hickey's move to San Francisco.
I went out for a fellowship at Stanford, and it's a great fellowship. They give you time to write, they pay you to be there, and you get to spend these 2 magical years on the farm, as they like to call it. And halfway through it, I met my wife on an airplane, actually. It's just strange. And she's not a writer. She was. I was just at the AWP conference, which is a writers' conference. So my wife was the first normal person I'd talked to in about 3 or 4 days. They're like, "Oh, this is a human being." And she's from the city of San Francisco. Grew up there, went to school there. Left for medical school for 4 years, but then came back. So I joke that I'm stuck in San Francisco because of that. But I miss this place. I really do. I've been here since, what day is it? I got here at the beginning of the weekend, kind of going back to the old haunts and driving around the same roads, that I used to cruise down. And it's just been this wonderful time of remembering what it's like to be amongst Minnesotans. They're okay in San Francisco, they're fine, but I had this really strange feeling that, like, man, I'm home, so it's I did not flee. Sometimes I flee back, sometimes I come back. Thank you. I'm very humbled that you've come, and it's so wonderful, so wonderful.
That wraps up our Scott County Library event with Jon Hickey. Make sure to catch our next Club Book podcast with Joshua Moline. Minnesota's own Joshua Moline is a unique voice and rising star in the crowded mystery and thriller landscape. He first introduced readers to Detective Ben Packard in the fictional but true-to-life Minnesota town of Sandy Lake in And There He Kept Her. Packard returns in A Long Time Gone. Visit us online at clubbook.org for details on past and present seasons, sign up for our e-newsletter, check out our calendar, and so much more. Stay up to date with all of our events at our Club Book Facebook page. If you're on Twitter, find us using the handle ClubBookMN. And if you enjoy these free Club Book events and podcasts, remember to share them with your friends. They just may too. Thanks again to all those who make Club Book possible, including MELSA, Library Strategies, and Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Our sponsors include Red Balloon Bookshop, where you can purchase all the books featured in Club Book. Finally, a very special thank you to all the libraries hosting events this season. That's it for Club Book, the coolest club in town. We'll see you at the library.